Picture this. Two of history's most brilliant minds, separated by centuries, somehow finding themselves face to face in a dimly lit Parisian café on a rainy Thursday evening. The kind of place where intellectuals have gathered for generations, where the coffee is strong and the conversations run deeper than the Seine. Jacques Derrida adjusts his glasses, steam rising from his espresso, as he notices an elegantly dressed man at the corner table, scribbling frantically in what appears to be a leather-bound journal. The man's intensity is magnetic. There's something both tormented and brilliant about the way he moves his pen across the page, as if he's racing against time itself. That man is Pascal, and tonight these two philosophical giants are about to engage in a debate that will shake the very foundations of human understanding. The question that will divide them: can humans truly live without metaphysics, or is our need for the transcendent as essential as our need for oxygen? The setting feels almost orchestrated by fate. Outside, the rain creates a rhythm against the windows, while inside, the warm amber light casts long shadows across worn wooden tables. The café buzzes with the quiet murmur of other conversations, but tonight only one discussion will matter. Derrida has spent his life deconstructing the very foundations of Western thought, arguing that our obsession with metaphysical truth is nothing more than an elaborate illusion. He believes that language itself proves there's no fixed meaning, no absolute truth waiting to be discovered. For him, metaphysics is the prison from which humanity must escape. Pascal, on the other hand, carries the weight of a man who has stared into the abyss of infinite space and found it terrifying. He's convinced that without belief in something beyond ourselves, without that metaphysical anchor, humans are doomed to despair. His famous wager isn't just philosophical gamesmanship, it's a lifeline thrown to drowning souls. The tension between them is palpable even before they speak. Derrida represents the postmodern world, where certainty has been shattered and truth has become relative. Pascal embodies the human cry for meaning in a seemingly meaningless universe, the desperate need to believe in something greater than ourselves. As Derrida rises from his table, coffee cup in hand, and approaches Pascal's corner, the entire café seems to hold its breath. These aren't just two men about to have a conversation. They're representatives of two fundamentally different ways of understanding human existence. "Excuse me," Derrida says, his voice carrying that distinctive French intellectual cadence, "but I couldn't help noticing your intensity. You write as if your life depends on it." Pascal looks up, his eyes reflecting both weariness and fire. "Perhaps it does," he replies, closing his journal. "I'm trying to solve the greatest puzzle of human existence, why we suffer so desperately when faced with uncertainty, and whether that suffering has any purpose." This is the moment when everything changes. Two brilliant minds, two radically different worldviews, about to collide in a debate that will force us to question everything we think we know about truth, meaning, and the human condition. What happens when someone who believes metaphysics is humanity's greatest illusion meets someone who believes it's our only salvation? When the man who sees language as proof that meaning is impossible sits across from the man who wagered his entire existence on the possibility of divine truth, the stakes couldn't be higher. This isn't just academic philosophy. It's about how we should live, what we should believe, and whether human beings can find genuine fulfillment in a world without absolute truth. It's about whether we're brave enough to live without the comfort of metaphysical certainty, or whether that certainty is actually what makes us human in the first place. As these two giants prepare to engage, one question emerges above all others. In a universe that offers no guarantees, no absolute truths, and no clear answers, can humans find a way to live meaningfully without retreating into metaphysical fantasy? Or is our need for the transcendent so fundamental that attempting to live without it would be like trying to breathe without air? The debate is about to begin, and by the end of this evening, everything you think you know about truth, meaning, and human nature will be challenged. The question isn't just whether humans can live without metaphysics, it's whether you can live with what these two brilliant minds are about to reveal, about the deepest foundations of human existence. Derrida settles into the chair across from Pascal, his movements deliberate and thoughtful. The café around them seems to fade into background noise as these two intellectual titans size each other up. Pascal's journal lies closed between them like a gauntlet thrown down, while Derrida's fingers drum softly against his coffee cup. "You know," Derrida begins, his voice carrying an almost conspiratorial tone, "I've read your work, your wager, your thoughts on the human condition, but I have to ask, don't you find it strange that you're trying to solve uncertainty with more uncertainty? You're essentially saying we should believe in God because we can't prove he doesn't exist. Pascal's laugh is short, but not unkind. And you, Monsieur Derrida, have spent your career telling us that nothing means anything, that all our attempts at understanding are just elaborate word games. But here you are, in a cafe at midnight, still trying to understand something. Don't you see the contradiction? The first blow has been struck and it's a direct hit. Derrida pauses, his eyes narrowing slightly. This isn't going to be the easy philosophical dismantling he might have expected. Pascal has immediately identified the central tension in deconstructionist thought. If nothing has fixed meaning, why bother trying to communicate at all? Touché, Derrida admits, raising his cup in a mock salute. But there's a difference between acknowledging the instability of meaning and clinging to metaphysical fairy tales. When I deconstruct language, I'm not destroying meaning. I'm revealing that meaning was never as solid as we pretended it was. I'm liberating humanity from the prison of false certainties. Liberation? Pascal's voice rises slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. He lowers it again, but the intensity remains. You call it liberation, but I call it abandonment. You're stripping away the very foundations that make human life bearable, and then you act surprised when people feel lost and desperate. The waiter approaches cautiously, sensing the gravity of the conversation. Pascal orders another wine, while Derrida requests a second espresso. As the young man walks away, both philosophers seem to recognize that this is going to be a long night. Let me tell you what I see, Pascal continues, leaning forward. I see human beings who are desperate for meaning, who cannot bear the thought that their lives are simply accidents in an indifferent universe. You can deconstruct all you want, but you cannot deconstruct the human heart's cry for significance. But that's exactly my point, Derrida responds, his voice taking on an almost pastoral quality. The human heart's cry, as you put it, has led us to create elaborate metaphysical systems that promise us what they cannot deliver. Your God, my friend, is just another text to be deconstructed. A particularly powerful one, certainly, but still just a human creation designed to ease our existential anxiety. Pascal's eyes flash. You speak of God as if he were merely a concept, a philosophical proposition to be examined and discarded. But what if you're wrong? What if there is something beyond our understanding, something that gives meaning to all this apparent meaninglessness? And what if you're wrong? Derrida counters. What if your entire worldview is built on a foundation of wishful thinking? What if your wager is just an elaborate form of intellectual cowardice, a refusal to face the possibility that we might actually be alone in this universe? The tension in the air is thick enough to cut. Other cafe patrons have begun to notice the intensity of their conversation, though few could probably follow the philosophical intricacies being debated. This isn't just an academic discussion. It's a fundamental clash over the nature of human existence. You accuse me of cowardice, Pascal says, his voice steady but filled with emotion. But I would argue that it takes tremendous courage to live as if there is something greater than ourselves, something worth striving for, even when we cannot prove its existence. Your deconstruction, for all its intellectual sophistication, strikes me as the real cowardice, the refusal to take the leap that human meaning requires. Derrida sits back in his chair, considering. The accusation stings because it contains a grain of truth. There is something almost paralyzing about endless deconstruction, something that can lead to a kind of intellectual nihilism. But he's not ready to concede the point. Perhaps, he says slowly, but consider this. What if the courage you speak of is actually a form of intellectual dishonesty? What if true courage lies in accepting uncertainty without retreating into comforting metaphysical myths? What if the most human thing we can do is learn to live beautifully in the absence of absolute truth? The question hangs in the air between them, heavy with implication. This is more than philosophy now. It's become a battle for the soul of human meaning itself. The cafe has grown quieter as the night deepens, and the conversation between these two intellectual giants has taken on an almost intimate quality. Pascal traces patterns on the wooden table with his finger, while Derrida stares out at the rain-soaked streets of Paris, both men lost in thought. Let me tell you something about the absence of absolute truth, Pascal says, breaking the silence. His voice carries a weight that seems to come from deep personal experience. I have stood at the edge of the mathematical infinite and felt the vertigo of complete insignificance. I have calculated the vast emptiness of space and realized how utterly alone we are. You speak of learning to live beautifully without metaphysical truth, but have you ever really experienced that void? Derrida turns back to face him, and for the first time tonight, there's something vulnerable in his expression. You think I haven't? Every time I deconstruct another cherished belief, every time I reveal the arbitrary nature of our most sacred concepts, I feel that void. The difference is that I don't try to fill it with comforting illusions. But is it really an illusion if it makes us more human? Pascal presses. You see, this is where I think your analysis fails. You treat metaphysical belief as if it were purely intellectual, as if we could simply think our way out of our need for transcendence. But that need isn't rational. It's existential. It's built into the very fabric of human consciousness. The waiter brings their drinks, and both men pause to acknowledge him with polite nods. The interruption gives them a moment to recalibrate, but the intensity of their debate is undiminished. You're making my argument for me, Derrida says, lifting his espresso. If the need for metaphysics is built into human consciousness, then it's part of the human condition that needs to be examined and understood, not simply accepted. We don't have to be slaves to our psychological needs. We can recognize them, analyze them, and perhaps transcend them. Or perhaps, Pascal counters, those needs point to something real. You're so focused on deconstruction that you've forgotten the possibility of construction, the possibility that human beings intuit metaphysical truth precisely because there is metaphysical truth to be intuited. This stops Derrida cold. It's a sophisticated argument that cuts to the heart of his entire philosophical project. If human beings consistently develop metaphysical beliefs across cultures and throughout history, could that be evidence for rather than against the reality of the metaphysical realm? That's a dangerous argument, Derrida says carefully. Human beings have also consistently developed beliefs in superstitions, conspiracy theories, and prejudices of all kinds. The universality of a belief doesn't make it true. It often just makes it a universal human failing. Ah, but there's a difference, Pascal replies, his eyes lighting up with the thrill of intellectual combat. Superstitions and prejudices divide us, create in-groups and out-groups, generate conflict and hatred. But the deepest metaphysical insights, the recognition of our need for meaning, our intuition of the sacred, our sense that there must be something more than material existence, these unite us across cultures and centuries. Derrida leans forward, intrigued despite himself. You're suggesting that the universal human hunger for metaphysics is qualitatively different from other universal human tendencies. Exactly. And more than that, I'm suggesting that this hunger is what makes us most human. Strip away our metaphysical dimension, and what are you left with? Sophisticated animals, certainly, but not the beings capable of art, music, poetry, love, and sacrifice that we actually are. The argument is gaining momentum, and both men can feel it. This isn't just about whether God exists or whether meaning is possible. It's about the very definition of human nature itself. But consider the cost, Derrida responds, his voice taking on an almost pleading quality. Yes, metaphysical belief might make us capable of great art and profound love, but it also makes us capable of religious wars, crusades, inquisitions, and every form of fanaticism known to humanity. When we convince ourselves that we have access to absolute truth, we become capable of absolute evil. Pascal nods grimly. I won't deny the horrors committed in the name of metaphysical certainty, but consider this. Weren't the greatest atrocities of the 20th century committed by regimes that explicitly rejected metaphysics? Stalin, Hitler, Mao, they all promised to create heaven on earth through purely materialist means. That's different, Derrida protests. But even as he says it, he realizes the weakness of his position. Those were ideologies, not the absence of ideology. Were they? Or were they simply metaphysical systems that refused to acknowledge their metaphysical nature, the belief in historical inevitability, in the perfectibility of human nature, in the possibility of creating a utopian society? These are all fundamentally metaphysical claims dressed up in materialist clothing. The conversation has reached a crucial turning point. Derrida finds himself confronting the possibility that his entire philosophical project might be based on a false premise, that eliminating metaphysics might not actually be possible, only disguising it or replacing it with more dangerous alternatives. The rain has intensified outside, creating a cocoon of intimacy around their corner table. Pascal takes a sip of his wine and looks directly at Derrida, his expression both compassionate and challenging. Let me pose this to you in terms you might appreciate, Pascal says. You spend your time deconstructing texts, revealing the instability of meaning. showing how every interpretation generates more interpretations. But what if human existence itself is a text that cannot be fully deconstructed? What if there's always a remainder, something that escapes your analytical tools? Derrida shifts uncomfortably. You're anthropomorphizing existence. Life isn't a text in any meaningful sense, isn't it? We tell ourselves stories about who we are, where we came from, where we're going. We create narratives to give shape to our experience. Even your deconstruction is a kind of story. The story of how all stories fail to capture truth. But what if that story is incomplete? Every story is incomplete, Derrida replies. That's precisely my point. The incompleteness isn't a flaw to be corrected. It's the fundamental condition of language and thought. But incompleteness implies the possibility of completion, doesn't it? Even if we never achieve it, the very concept suggests something beyond our current understanding. You can't have a notion of the incomplete without some sense of what completion might look like. Derrida pauses, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. The argument is elegant and troubling. In his effort to show the impossibility of final meaning, has he inadvertently pointed toward the possibility of something beyond meaning altogether? You're playing word games, he says, but his tone lacks conviction. Am I? Or am I pointing to something you've overlooked in your analysis? Consider your own work. Why does it matter to you that people understand the instability of meaning? Why not just embrace nihilism and be done with it? The very fact that you continue to write, to teach, to engage with ideas, suggests that you believe in something beyond the endless play of signification. The accusation hits home. Derrida has always struggled with this tension in his own work. If meaning is truly impossible, why does the work of revealing that impossibility feel so urgent and important? Perhaps, Derrida says slowly, I believe in the ethical value of honesty, in showing people the reality of their situation rather than allowing them to live in comforting illusions. But why is honesty ethical if there's no transcendent framework to give it value? You're smuggling in metaphysical assumptions while claiming to reject metaphysics entirely. The philosophical trap is elegant and brutal. Pascal has shown that even the most rigorous deconstruction seems to require some kind of foundational commitment to truth, to ethics, to the value of human understanding itself. Let me tell you about my wager from a different angle, Pascal continues, sensing his advantage. It's not really about God in the traditional sense. It's about whether human beings can afford to live as if nothing matters ultimately. Even if you're right about the impossibility of absolute truth, wouldn't it be better to live as if truth were possible than to surrender to meaninglessness? That's intellectual dishonesty, Derrida objects. You're asking me to believe something I know to be false simply because it would be convenient to believe it. No, I'm asking you to consider that your knowledge might be incomplete. You claim to know that absolute truth is impossible, but isn't that itself an absolute truth claim? You've made metaphysics the enemy, but you've done so on metaphysical grounds. The conversation has reached a kind of philosophical checkmate. Derrida finds himself in the uncomfortable position of defending absolute claims about the impossibility of absolute claims. The self-referential paradox is dizzying. Even if I grant your point, Derrida says, even if I acknowledge that my position contains its own metaphysical assumptions, that doesn't make your God any more real. At best, it shows that we're all trapped in some form of metaphysical thinking. Exactly, Pascal exclaims, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. We are all trapped in metaphysical thinking because we are metaphysical beings. The question isn't whether we can escape metaphysics, it's which metaphysics we choose to embrace. And you choose Christianity because it's the metaphysics that best accounts for the full complexity of human experience. It acknowledges our capacity for both great good and great evil, our simultaneous nobility and wretchedness, our hunger for meaning in a universe that often seems meaningless. It doesn't promise easy answers, but it promises that the questions matter. Derrida stares out at the rain, considering. The conversation has moved far from where he expected it to go. He came into this debate confident in his position, certain that he could easily dismantle Pascal's metaphysical commitments. Instead, he finds his own foundations shaken. And if you're wrong, he asks quietly, if there is no God, no ultimate meaning, no transcendent framework to give value to our struggles, Pascal smiles, and for the first time all evening it's a genuinely peaceful expression. Then I will have lived as if beauty and truth and goodness mattered, as if human dignity was sacred, as if love were more than biochemistry. Even if I'm wrong about the ultimate source of these values, I cannot imagine a more human way to live. The cafe has nearly emptied now, leaving only a few late-night stragglers and the gentle hum of conversation from the kitchen. Derrida and Pascal have been talking for hours, and the weight of their discussion hangs between them like something tangible. But you still haven't addressed the fundamental problem, Derrida says, his voice quieter now, more reflective. Even granting that we might be metaphysical beings who cannot escape metaphysical thinking, how do we choose between competing metaphysical systems? How do we avoid the violence that inevitably accompanies absolute conviction? Pascal nods thoughtfully. It's a fair question and one I've wrestled with deeply. The answer, I think, lies in understanding the difference between metaphysical humility and metaphysical certainty. My wager isn't about being certain that God exists. It's about recognizing that the stakes are too high to live as if he certainly doesn't. But that humility seems to disappear the moment you commit to a specific religious tradition. Christianity has its own history of violence, its own claims to exclusive truth. True, Pascal admits, but here's what I've discovered. Genuine metaphysical commitment actually requires profound humility. The moment I truly believe in a God who is infinitely greater than my understanding, I must acknowledge that my understanding is infinitely limited. True faith makes dogmatism impossible. Derrida raises an eyebrow. That's a sophisticated position, but history suggests that most believers don't share your philosophical sophistication. They use their faith to justify intolerance, not humility. And isn't that exactly what you do with your deconstruction? Pascal counters. I'll use it to justify a kind of intellectual superiority, a position from which you can look down on those poor souls still trapped in metaphysical thinking. Every philosophical position can be corrupted by human pride. The observation stings because it contains more truth than Derrida wants to admit. He has often felt a certain intellectual pride in his ability to see through the illusions that comfort others. But is that pride really different from religious fanaticism? Perhaps the difference, Derrida says slowly, is that my position doesn't claim access to ultimate truth. It's a methodology, not a metaphysics. But methodologies rest on metaphysical assumptions about the nature of reality, the reliability of reason, the value of truth-seeking itself. You can't escape metaphysics by calling it methodology. The philosophical tennis match continues, but both men seem to be growing weary of the constant back and forth. There's a sense that they're approaching something deeper than argumentation, something that requires a different kind of engagement. Let me tell you about a moment that changed my understanding, Pascal says, his voice taking on a more personal tone. I was working on a mathematical problem, the nature of infinity. The more deeply I explored it, the more I realized that human reason reaches a point where it must either embrace mystery or declare defeat. I chose mystery, and in that choice, I found not the end of thinking, but the beginning of a different kind of thinking. But mystery can be dangerous, Derrida responds. Once you allow mystery into your thinking, how do you prevent it from overwhelming everything? How do you maintain any kind of critical judgment? The same way you maintain critical judgment while acknowledging the instability of meaning. You proceed carefully with awareness of your limitations, but you proceed nonetheless. The alternative is paralysis. Derrida considers this. There is something appealing about Pascal's willingness to embrace uncertainty while still making commitments. It seems more honest than either blind faith or dogmatic skepticism. But commitment requires choosing, Derrida says, and choice requires criteria. What criteria do you use to choose between metaphysical systems, if not reason and evidence? The same criteria you use to choose to continue deconstructing rather than simply stopping altogether. Something in you recognizes the value of the work, even if you can't provide ultimate justification for that recognition. You follow what calls to you most deeply, what seems to honor the full complexity of human experience. That sounds dangerously subjective. No more dangerous than claiming objective knowledge of the impossibility of objective knowledge. At least I'm honest about the leap I'm taking. The conversation has reached another level of complexity. Both men are beginning to see that their positions might not be as far apart as they initially seemed. Both acknowledge human limitation. Both struggle with the problem of justification. Both seek ways to live meaningfully in the face of uncertainty. So what you're suggesting, Derrida says, is that the choice between metaphysical commitment and metaphysical skepticism is itself a kind of wager, that neither position can be justified on purely rational grounds. Exactly. And given that both positions are wagers, the question becomes which wager better serves human flourishing, which better honors the mystery and dignity of human existence. And you believe metaphysical commitment wins that comparison? Pascal pauses before answering, choosing his words carefully. I believe that human beings need something to live for that transcends their individual existence, whether you call it God, or truth, or justice, or beauty. We need to believe that our lives matter in some ultimate sense. Deconstruction might be intellectually honest, but I'm not sure it's existentially sustainable. The observation hangs in the air, challenging everything Derrida has built his career on. Is it possible that his philosophical honesty comes at the cost of human flourishing? Is there a tension between what is intellectually rigorous and what is existentially necessary? As the night deepens toward dawn, both philosophers seem to sense that their conversation is approaching its climax. The cafe staff has begun cleaning around them, but neither man seems ready to end what has become far more than a debate. It's become a mutual exploration of the deepest questions of human existence. You know, Derrida says, breaking a long, contemplative silence, there's something you said earlier that I can't stop thinking about. This idea that metaphysical need might point to metaphysical reality. It troubles me, because it suggests that my entire project might be not just intellectually misguided, but existentially harmful. Pascal leans forward, sensing the vulnerability in Derrida's admission. It doesn't have to be harmful. Perhaps your deconstruction has cleared away false certainties to make room for a more authentic encounter with mystery. Perhaps you've been doing theological work without realizing it. Theological work? Derrida laughs, but it's not a dismissive laugh. That's quite a reframe. You're suggesting that by showing the impossibility of human systems of meaning, I've actually opened space for divine meaning. Why not? Some of the greatest mystics have insisted that God can only be encountered through the via negativa, by stripping away everything we think we know about the divine. Your deconstruction might be a form of unknowing that prepares the heart for a different kind of knowing. The suggestion is both tantalizing and terrifying. Could it be that Derrida's life work has been a kind of spiritual discipline in disguise? The thought seems to unlock something in him that has been carefully suppressed. But that would mean accepting that there are forms of knowledge that transcend rational analysis, Derrida says. It would mean acknowledging that the heart has reasons that reason cannot fathom. Precisely. And isn't that what you've already done? Your entire project depends on intuitions about meaning, language, and human experience that you cannot fully justify rationally. You've already made the leap. You just haven't admitted it to yourself. The accusation, gentle but devastating, forces Derrida to confront the foundations of his own work in a new way. Has he been operating on a kind of faith all along? Faith in the value of truth, in the importance of intellectual honesty, in the possibility of human understanding, even in the absence of ultimate certainty. If I granted your point, Derrida says carefully, if I acknowledged that my work rests on something like faith, what would that change? How would that alter my understanding of metaphysics and religion? It would mean that you're already living in the metaphysical realm, already making wagers about ultimate reality. The question becomes whether you want to remain unconscious of those wagers or bring them into the light where they can be examined and embraced. And if I brought them into the light, Pascal smiles, then you might discover that the God you've been deconstructing is not the God worth believing in anyway. You might find that true divinity is encountered not through rational proof, but through the kind of radical openness that your work has cultivated. The conversation has taken an unexpected turn. Instead of defending traditional metaphysics against postmodern critique, Pascal has suggested that postmodern critique might be a pathway to authentic metaphysical encounter. It's a move that reveals the sophistication of his theological thinking. You're suggesting that doubt might be a form of faith, Derrida asks. I'm suggesting that honest doubt is more faithful than dishonest certainty. If God is real, then God can handle our questions, our deconstructions, our refusal to settle for easy answers. The faith that's worth having is the faith that emerges from wrestling with doubt, not the faith that avoids it. Derrida sits back in his chair, overwhelmed by the implications of Pascal's argument. If taken seriously, it would mean that his entire intellectual journey, his skepticism, his deconstruction, his refusal of metaphysical comfort, might itself be a form of spiritual seeking. But how would I know, he asks? How would I distinguish between authentic metaphysical encounter and self-deception? How would I avoid simply projecting my desires onto the universe? The same way you avoid self-deception in your philosophical work, through rigorous honesty, through willingness to be wrong, through openness to correction and revision. The practices are the same. Only the horizon is different, and the horizon is the possibility that meaning might be given rather than constructed, that truth might be encountered rather than created, that the human hunger for transcendence might point to something transcendent rather than simply revealing our evolutionary programming. The cafe is closing around them now, and they can sense the evening drawing to its natural conclusion, but neither man wants to end on an abstract note. The conversation has become too personal, too consequential for philosophical abstractions. What would it mean practically, Derrida asks, if I took seriously the possibility that my work has been a kind of theological preparation? What would that change about how I live, how I think, how I engage with others? Pascal considers the question seriously. It might mean approaching your work with even greater humility, recognizing that your insights might be gifts rather than achievements. It might mean being more patient with those who find comfort in traditional religious forms, understanding that they might be grasping toward the same truth you're seeking through different means. And it might mean being open to forms of experience that transcend rational analysis. It might, but carefully with discernment, always tested against the fullness of human experience and the wisdom of communities that have wrestled with these questions for centuries. The conversation has reached a kind of resolution, though not the kind either man expected when the evening began. Dawn is breaking over Paris as Derrida and Pascal finally prepare to leave the cafe. The rain has stopped, and the first light of morning streams through the windows, casting everything in a soft, golden glow. Their conversation has lasted through the night, and both men seem exhausted but oddly energized by what they've discovered. So where does this leave us? Derrida asks as he gathers his things. Have you convinced me to abandon deconstruction and embrace Christianity? Have I persuaded you that metaphysics is just sophisticated, wishful thinking? Pascal chuckles as he closes his journal. I think we've done something more interesting than either of those outcomes. We've discovered that our positions might not be as opposed as we thought. Perhaps the deepest questions can't be resolved through argument alone. Perhaps not, Derrida agrees. But they can be illuminated, refined, deepened. I find myself thinking differently about certainty and doubt, about faith and reason, about the relationship between intellectual honesty and existential commitment. As they walk toward the door, Pascal turns to his unlikely conversation partner. You know, I think the question we've been circling all night isn't really whether humans can live without metaphysics. It's whether we can live without hope, hope that our lives matter, that our struggles have meaning, that truth and beauty and goodness are more than just useful fictions. And your answer? Is that hope itself might be a form of knowledge, not rational knowledge, but something deeper, a knowledge that comes through engagement rather than analysis, through commitment rather than detachment. Derrida nods slowly. It's a beautiful thought. And even if it's wrong, even if hope is just a psychological necessity with no correspondence to reality, perhaps living as if it's true creates the kind of reality worth living in. Now you're beginning to understand the wager, Pascal says with a smile. They step out onto the empty Parisian street, where the morning light has transformed the rain-soaked pavement into something that looks almost sacred. The city is waking up around them, but they both seem reluctant to return to their normal lives after the intensity of their nocturnal philosophical journey. Will this change how you work? Pascal asks. Derrida considers the question seriously. I think it will make me more conscious of the metaphysical dimensions of my own thinking, more aware of the faith commitments that underlie even the most rigorous skepticism, perhaps more gentle with those who choose different forms of that faith, and more open to the possibility that meaning might be discovered rather than constructed, perhaps. Though I suspect I'll continue to be suspicious of claims to have discovered absolute truth. The world has seen too much violence committed in the name of certainty. Pascal nods. A healthy suspicion. True faith, I think, should make us more humble, not more arrogant, more aware of how little we actually understand about the mystery we're embedded in. They reach the corner where their paths will diverge, and both men seem to sense the significance of the moment. They've been adversaries in a philosophical debate, but somewhere during the long night, they've become something closer to fellow travelers. Thank you, Derrida says, extending his hand. I came into this conversation thinking I understood the stakes. You've shown me that the territory is far more complex and interesting than I realized. And thank you, Pascal replies, shaking his hand warmly. You've reminded me that faith worth having must be able to withstand the most rigorous questioning. Perhaps that's what makes it genuine faith rather than mere wishful thinking. As they part ways, walking in opposite directions down the narrow Parisian street, both men carry with them questions that will continue to evolve long after their conversation has ended. The debate about whether humans can live without metaphysics has revealed itself to be a question about the nature of human hope, the possibility of meaning, and the mysterious relationship between doubt and faith. Perhaps that's the most profound discovery of their long night together, that the deepest philosophical questions can't be solved but only lived into, that wisdom comes not from having the right answers, but from learning to ask better questions, and that even the most seemingly opposed worldviews might be different ways of responding to the same fundamental human needs. The morning light grows stronger as both philosophers disappear into the awakening city, each carrying away a changed understanding of what it means to be human in a universe that offers no easy answers, but perhaps, just perhaps, offers something even more valuable: the possibility that our questions themselves are a form of prayer, our doubts a kind of devotion, and our endless search for truth. A participation in something larger than ourselves, whether that something is God or simply the magnificent complexity of human consciousness, may be impossible to determine. But after their night-long conversation, both men understand that the attempt to live as if the question matters might be the most human thing of all. The debate is over, but the conversation continues. In every heart that wrestles with meaning, in every mind that refuses easy answers, in every life that chooses hope over despair, even when reason can't provide ultimate justification for that choice, and perhaps that ongoing conversation, rather than any final resolution, is where the deepest truth resides.